Hello, and welcome to Navigating the French, the podcast where each episode we look at a different French word and try and see what it tells us about French culture. I'm your host, Emily Monaco. Today, I'm chatting with Julie Barlow, a Canadian journalist and the co-author of the Bonjour Effect. She's here to discuss a word that definitely does not mean hello. Bonjour. All right. And for today's episode of Navigating the French, we are going to be talking about probably one of the most essential, I think, words that you need to understand when you come to France and you're speaking to French people. And that is, of course, the word bonjour, which if you took a French class, you're probably going to think that bonjour just means hello. But with our guest today, we are going to learn that that is far from the only thing or really what bonjour truly means. Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for joining me today. Could you tell me a little bit about your book? You basically wrote the book on bonjour, if I have that right. Can you tell me a little bit about your history of as an author, as a journalist, and that book in particular?
Sure. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be back with you. Well, let's start with, the idea from the book which was co-written with my co-author and husband, Jean-Benoît Nadeau. We had written previously books about the French and a book on the French language. And then we had a couple of years in the Spanish language and came back to France. And the idea was that we wanted to go back to France. We wanted to spend some time with the French. And we realized that even after we'd written a whole history of the French language and a whole book about how to interpret the French through their customs and through their traditions and, the structure of their society, and that was our first book, 60 Million Frenchmen Can't Be Wrong. We were still having problems. We were still having malentendus, misunderstandings of the French. After all these years of studying and speaking to them and interacting with them and, being in French media, on French radio, we were still having these moments where we felt like we had said something wrong. And we thought, what is going on? So we decided to pitch the idea to our editor of another book just on French conversation style. And over the course of our research, which we spent a year back in Paris with our kids who were just in primary school at the time. Over the course of our research, it really sunk in what this word meant, bonjour. And you mentioned that it's one of the most important words. I think for conversation, it's by far the most important word to know, but not as what we think it means, which is hello, but indeed like how it opens conversations in all sorts of circumstances. And it's really like a gateway to get any kind of interaction with the French in almost any situation you're in. So it's fundamental to understand that everything starts with bonjour.
So that's super interesting. And I think you're talking about all conversations beginning with bonjour. I think something that's kind of interesting to see and a way that you can see that right off the bat in France is the way that people react when you don't say bonjour. So if I had been coming into this conversation with you and you had been French and I hadn't started with bonjour, I might have gotten a very different response from you, which you go into.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think the important thing to understand about bonjour is that it's what's known in linguistics as a fatigue, a phatic. So in English, we have similar things that we say just to sort of get the ball rolling, Bonjour in the French doesn't mean hello. It means various things. And the reason that you won't get a response from people if you don't say bonjour to start a conversation is that bonjour means three things. It means I'm about to ask for something. I'm in your territory. And most probably importantly, I want to converse. It's the word that you have to say to indicate to the French that you want to talk. It doesn't go without saying with the French that you want to talk. There needs to be this formal introduction before anything really starts. So let's say, I guess the most common instance of people failing to say bonjour is perhaps when they enter a shop in Paris or in France, anywhere with the French. It's absolutely essential to say bonjour and to wait for them to say bonjour back. And in this case, what you're saying is, hello, I would like to ask you for something. So I tell the story in the book of myself and a handicapped friend in the Paris metro when I was doing research for an article on the topic in Paris. And, in a very vulnerable situation, we go into the metro looking for the way to get him in his wheelchair through the metro, and through the gate. And I failed to say bonjour. I said, excusez-moi, which is like a Canadian trend. I know, like, excuse me, can you help me? And to the metro agent just stared at me. I was like, really, like, we're looking like we're people who need help here. And it didn't matter. I had not said bonjour. And so he said to me in a very pointed manner, bonjour. And I said, bonjour. And then he was fine, then he helped us. It was not a problem. But every conversation, particularly when you're going to ask for something, has to start with this fundamentally polite way of indicating that you want something.
And you do get that reaction that's almost kind of like you're being scolded, like you're a child. It kind of reminds me of like parents saying, "And what's the magic word?" It's like, exactly. It is the magic word, kind of. It opens doors for you. And if you don't say it, you might get bad service, you might get no service, or you might just get that sort of haughty eyebrow raise and that long, bonjour.
Bonjour. Yeah, the long drawn out bonjour. Like I said, like pointed. No, absolutely. Totally. It's and it gives the French a reputation of being haughty and cold, and people often complain about the French and the service they get, but mostly it's because they don't know the code. I mean, our book, the rest of the book is all about all the different codes in French conversation, and this bonjour is like the king code. Like nothing starts without bonjour.
Absolutely.
There's also a thing about it, and not even if you don't really, you're not asking for something, you're not going into a store or whatever, just being in someone's territory, you're expected to address them. We have a tendency, English speakers, of sort of avoiding and keeping our eyes down, or vaguely acknowledging other people to sort of keep our distance. But what the French prefer to mark their territory and have their territory recognized. So we tell the story in the book about getting on the bus, for instance, and this is the bus driver's territory, And if you don't say bonjour and say hello, I'm in your territory, you're really considered to be rude. There was a little incident that I tell in the book as well about being in a gym with a little section for parents. My kids were taking a badminton lesson, and we had this little bubble where the parents all sat sort of in a mezzanine above the badminton courts. And as the kids came by, because they had to pass through this to go back and to get down into the gym, the little kids would say bonjour as they pass, and it seems to us as North Americans so like ultra polite, like who raises their kids to say hello to strangers all the time, but it's because they're going through our territory, and the kids know that they have to say bonjour and recognize that they're in the parents' area, and along they move. It's really a hard reflex to adopt when you don't come from that culture, but it's certainly extremely important, especially in a situation where you're on a bus or again in a store. Even if you're not asking for something, it's important to say hello. I know I'm in your territory.
Mm-hmm. And those are like, of the 3 instances that you describe in the book of times where you really need to say bonjour, of, basically I'm going to speak or I'm going to ask you for something. This third one, this I'm entering your space, I think might be the most foreign for North Americans. Because I think like Americans or Canadians, we might go up to someone and say like, sorry. We start by apologizing, or we say, excuse me, or hey. But, when you're just entering someone's space, and especially an outdoor space. So this is one that I've noticed. I usually live in Paris, but sometimes I go out into the countryside and I go hiking. And when you pass someone on like a rural hiking trail, everybody says bonjour. And you're never going to see these people again. That's the only thing you're going to say. But it's this like space, occupying the same space. What do you think that's all about?
Well, I think there's something about personal space. Okay, when the French, when we're sort of crushed together in the metro, yeah, it's hard to say exactly what that is in that particular case. It's sort of, you're in their space. It's also just polite, that you're. I mean, I would normally say bonjour. Be careful to say bonjour to people whose actual business or personal space I'm actually in their territory. That's, I think, also a question of simply being polite, acknowledging their presence. It's funny because there's a little bit of a, we will say, hi, how you doing, English speakers, to sort of mark the fact that we don't want to talk to people, You have to be careful with bonjour, because bonjour is normally, I mean, in the specific space of, marking the territory, that's definitely something that you just say bonjour when you pass along, But in a lot of cases, bonjour also means I want to converse, right? Like you would never start talking to somebody by saying excuse me or just talking, you would always say bonjour. And it usually indicates that if you want to talk to somebody, you really have to start with bonjour. It's hard to know exactly, what context you should be saying bonjour in, especially for an outsider. But our rule that we repeat in the book is, if you think you're saying it too much, you're probably saying it just enough. like just say it all the time. And you won't offend people. You will be able to talk to people if you want to. You'll get good service if you want to. And generally life will be smoother and you'll be looked at less like, someone who's rude. I mean, we all jump to conclusions about people who aren't from our own culture. And I'm afraid the French tend to see us as rude when we fail to say bonjour.
We'll be right back with Navigating the French after a word from our sponsors.
Marie, should I find an apartment before I move to Paris?
Well,
What's a tenant file? And a guarantor? Do I need them?
depends.
I just bought an apartment. What should I do with it?
Congratulations. Something to think about our...
Is it better to rent my apartment furnished or unfurnished? How do I set my rental rates?
Gail, these are all great questions, but the answers may not be so simple. Perhaps it's better to tune into our new podcast, Paris, a State of Mind.
Oh, that's a great idea. I'm Gail Boisclair.
And I'm Marie Pistinier.
Between us, we have more than 35 years of experience in real estate and rental services. Listen in as we answer all your burning queries.
You can even submit your own questions for us to answer.
Paris, a State of Mind. Mondays on Paris Underground Radio.
What bra are you wearing right now? Whether you're smiling from ear to ear because you love your bra, or whether you winced because you're wearing, yet again, something you'd rather not, tune into Paris Undressed, the podcast that goes behind the seams of the lingerie capital of the world. Hi, I'm Kate Kemp Griffin, author and host of Paris Undressed. From boudoir to the street, we'll explore the art of making and wearing French lingerie. We'll meet the designers and brands shaping our bodies and talk to fascinating people about femininity, sensuality, and sexuality. We'll share bra stories, secrets, desires, hopes, and dreams. This is the ultimate special occasion. So put on your favorite bra and tune into Paris Undressed, Tuesdays on Paris Underground Radio.
And now, back to Navigating the French. That, to me, always seems like a really huge misunderstanding because we as North Americans perceive the French as rude and they perceive us as rude. And I think a lot of it comes down to this bonjour question, because I know that, for example, if I have friends who live in small towns and they will come home and say, oh my God, you'll never believe what happened. I saw so-and-so's daughter at the grocery store and she didn't even say bonjour to me. Like, it's this big thing. Whereas I think we perceive the French as rude maybe because we neglect to say that bonjour, and then they're going to be cold to us from the outset because we've not said what we were supposed to say.
Yeah, it's always on. Yeah, I would never wait around for someone to say bonjour. For that matter, when you say bonjour, you have to wait until they say bonjour back. The deal is not sealed until both people have said bonjour. So it requires a little bit more of an outgoing spirit to being out with people than normally we're used to. You shouldn't wait around for people to say bonjour to you. It sounds paradoxical because somebody's got to start. But as a foreigner, you will be looked down upon. And I mean, who would want to mess up a code by accident? Just say bonjour.
Right.
Just say it. And it probably will do the trick.
Yeah.
And let people warm up and give them the time to, be ready for you to ask them whatever you want, advice or directions, or, to try on a pair of shoes, whatever. You should always be on the safe side and just be out with it. But it's a reflex that you have to develop with practice. Honestly, I slip up and I'm used to it. I've been speaking French and going back and forth to France for 25 years now. And it's just not part of most English speakers' makeup to be right out there, and say bonjour, start everything very outright sort of thing,
Yeah. And the other reflex, of course, that you have to slip into is switching from bonjour to bonsoir and bonne journée to bonne soirée. That's the other one, is once you get used to the bonjour, it's like French people have some kind of internal clock that tell them it's about 5 o'clock in the evening, I think. But like they have this internal clock that starts to tell them when they should start saying bonsoir instead of bonjour. And they look at you like you're a crazy person if you accidentally say bonjour and it's the wrong time of day to say bonjour.
Yeah, I know. I can't say that I've absolutely got my, got a grip and 100% on it, especially since I haven't been living in France. I've been living in Quebec for the last 5 years. So here it's a little bit like bonsoir is really kind of for like after 7 or 8 at night.
Sure.
It's not really for, but the French definitely by the time it's like apéro hour, basically.
Definitely.
That's how I used to think of it. Like it's time to know that apéro, it's time for after work drinks or whatever, then it's bonsoir. I think it's kind of like the work day is over, maybe. Mm-hmm. I don't know. In grand scheme of things, the intent of saying bonjour is still registered, I think, even if you miss it by 10 minutes and you're off by 10 minutes, it's still a good idea. But bonsoir is fine, and it's mainly serves the same purpose as far as I can tell.
And one of my favorite purposes that you wrote in your book, and now I've started saying to friends, and we all laugh because I've been living here for 15 years, and there's still these quirks that we get used to it, but we still find it funny. And to North Americans, customer service here in France seems absolutely abhorrent. I'm sorry. It's like we never feel like anyone is really leaning in to help us. But bonjour always seems like the key to getting people to really want to help you out. And something you wrote in the book was that saying bonjour in that context is basically saying, please allow me to indulge in your services.
It's about it. Yeah. That's
and I love that. I love that so much.
There are two things though. And there is bonjour. That's essential to go into any store. But there's a fundamental difference that we write about in our previous book as well that I think would probably be helpful for your listeners, which is that a store, it's about the difference between private and public spaces. And a store for North Americans is a public space. Like we're allowed to be in there if we just feel like it. We go in, it's ours. In France, it's still considered, it's not really, but it's still considered something akin to the house of the owner of the store. So even in a big department store, people will have their territory, and it's sort of psychologically to them, it's more something that they consider their territory, right? It's a private space. So, bonjour or no bonjour, you still have to recognize that when you're going into a store, you're entering, it's like, to the French, it's like entering their house. So you're not there to demand service. You're there to request help. And bonjour, of course, is key to that. Like, you're not going to get anywhere. It was funny when we were promoting the book a few years ago in Paris, the French version of the book, I did a seminar at a journalism school, and a young aspiring journalist had read the book and did not believe that bonjour was so important to go into a store. Of course, he was so used to it that he never thought about it, but he was like, I did not believe it. And he got up and told the story. He has a favorite bookstore that he went to, regularly close to where he was living. And he said, so I didn't believe your theory, so I tried it out. And he went to this store where he's known, he's there all the time. And he entered, and he didn't say bonjour. And he said, the interesting thing was I felt so uncomfortable. And of course, the owner of the store felt uncomfortable too and didn't talk to him. He said, like, even for me, even for the French who take it for granted, if you don't say it, you're not going to get good service. And he laughed because he really, truly couldn't believe that it was that important. But of course, the French don't recognize it. They don't think about it. They do it so automatically.
I think I do it automatically now, but before, I think about 6 years into living here, much like you, it had taken me a really long time to get on board with the bonjouring. And I knew that I had to do it when I went into shops. I knew that I had to do it when I saw people that I hadn't seen for a while, but I was working full time in a French office. And so every day I would go into work and I would sit down at my desk and I would start working. And maybe I know, you know where this is going.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
About 6 or 7 months into working full time there, I had a couple of close friends at the office, and one of them, sat down next to me and his face is very grave. And he's like, Emily, I need to tell you something. And I was like, what? And he goes, you've kind of developed a reputation at the office for being a bitch. And I was like, what are you talking about? I smile. I'm nice to everybody. He's like, yeah, but you don't say bonjour to people when you get here. Yeah. And that was when I realized I was supposed to, it was a small office, maybe 35 of us, but the expectation was that I was going to go around to everybody's desk, at least people who'd gotten there before me, and say bonjour to everyone. And the fact that I hadn't done that had made me, I'd ostracized myself basically by not knowing that that was what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's so funny. I knew you were going to say, I never worked in an office, but I worked in radio and so on. And indeed, like you have to go around. And I've heard people talk about this. You really have to go around and like shake hands and say bonjour to everybody in the office every morning. I have no idea how the French find time for that every day in every office. But yeah, that's the way it works. So, well, it's good that they let you know. It's unfortunate that they took so long, because there's no reason, it's a really simple thing to do.
Oh, I'm very lucky my friend let me know.
So now you picked it up.
Well, now I'm a freelancer, so it doesn't apply anymore. But oh my God. At the time I realized I was supposed to be doing it, but it still felt really fake to me. And I think it still, even though I knew it, it took me a while before I could really lean into, because it feels very performative, but it is what they want. And there's something weird about it.
It feels overly formal. It feels like you're putting it on. I know it's really not natural to most English speakers, particularly North Americans. It feels like a ritual. But it is a ritual. It's just a ritual that's really important for them. And
well, I demanded my friend tell me why, and he was trying to figure it out, kind of like this journalist that you were talking about, where he was like, well, you just do. And I was like, but why? He's like, but you just do. And he said something that actually was echoed in your book, which is that bonjour makes everybody feel like equals. We'll be right back with Navigating the French after a word from our sponsors.
If I ask you what it's like to be a Parisian writer, what do you imagine? Drinking noisette after noisette in a noisy cafe? Jotting down lines in your bedside journal while your lover fetches you fresh croissant? Stumbling down the streets overflowing with prose and red wine like Hemingway? Well, now's your chance to find out. My name is Jennifer Garrity, and I'm host of the Storytime in Paris podcast. In each episode, I chat with a writer with a French connection. The twist? The questions come from you, the writer's biggest fans and followers. Then our beloved writers will read us an excerpt from their books. So cozy up with a noisette, a croissant, or whatever's your pleasure, and settle in for Storytime in Paris on Paris Underground Radio.
Welcome to Paris Underground Radio's The Heart of You. My name is Annette Deleu. This is a podcast about soul exploration, finding out what your true purpose is in this lifetime through various modalities such as grounding and energy clearing, divination, and exploring your past lives. Over the next 20 episodes, I will also be interviewing experts in the fields of astrology, mediumship, as well as numerology. Join us every Thursday for a brand new episode. Go to parisundergroundradio.com for more information. And don't forget to follow us on social media at Paris Underground Radio on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I look forward to walking this journey with you.
And now, back to Navigating the French. I think equality is a really important value in France. Do you sort of perceive bonjour as an equalizer in communication?
We didn't really go that far. I mean, it's just like it's one chapter of a book about all sorts of different codes. So we didn't like dig into it quite that much. But that's an interesting theory. I think that's part of what you're doing when you're going into a store and asking for service. You are kind of equalizing in a way. Well, you're sort of showing them respect, which is a bit different, I guess. But it's so everyone feels like they're on the same wavelength, I guess. But in an office situation, I hadn't really thought about that, but that is interesting. But I think your friend probably, like the young journalist I was just talking about, probably just hadn't really had any need to think about it before either. I mean, it's like everybody does it, nobody thinks about it. It's so natural and so normal, My kids picked it up at school. It was interesting because we plunged them into this like totally different universe. They were 10 years old. And they picked up that stuff really quickly. And that's the way, they're taught those sort of manners and ways of communicating. They're taught to be very outgoing about their communication too. I'm coming back to that, like to be very, to take the bull by the horns, not to wait around to be spoken to, but to speak, So, it's a sign of good manners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it runs kind of countercurrent to a habit that I had thought was a good habit from my time in North America and kind of had to drop here, which is to smile at everybody.
Oh, yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. It feels friendly, but it's not.
Yeah, no, it seems fake to the French. And isn't that funny? Like for North Americans, it's the sign that you give, a little like saying bonjour, of saying, okay, we're cool. We're on the same side, and we also smile at people in public as a way of saying, really, like, I don't want to talk to you, but, hi, I see you. We're good. But for the French, smiling, they see foreigners smiling all the time and they think that they look like idiots. But that's got to do with other parts of the French mentality. It seems that to them, insincere, as many very overly optimistic, overly positive things do seem to the French insincere. You understood. The smile is just not the way to get ahead. It's even more effective to voice an opinion that would seem a little out of place to a North American. That's a better way of interacting with the French than smiling, which to them makes you look either insincere and or naive or not very intelligent. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you've ever run into this particular situation while you were here, but sometimes if you see someone during the day, you have a conversation with them and then you leave them, and then later in the day, you run into the same person. And there's this weird dance. It's kind of like the dance of like when you're trying to get through a door and or past someone and you both go to the right and then you both go to the left. You can't get past each other. There's this recurring thing that I see among French people where they see someone they've seen earlier in the day and they go, bonjour, fin, rebonjour. So they say, bonjour, I mean, bonjour again. And there's this almost rudeness of saying bonjour twice to the same person in the same day. So you have to kind of acknowledge that you've already said bonjour earlier in the day, but this is a new conversation. Have you ever encountered that?
Yeah, I guess so. I can't remember distinctly. Again, with my rule of bonjour and bonjour, I just like bonjour it, like I don't wait around sort of if I see somebody, but you do say it with a smile. If you're saying it again, I would say it with a sort of knowing smile that, careful with the smile, right? But knowing like a face that shows that I acknowledge that we've said bonjour already, But I think most people would expect you to say bonjour after a certain amount of time has passed in the day, for sure. Not an hour or two, but if you've left the context and coming back to the context and see them again, I would expect to say bonjour again or rebonjour again. Indeed. Yeah, that's interesting that you found that you've had situations where it was uncomfortable.
Well, it almost felt like if you were to say bonjour to the same person again, it's like you forgot the first conversation you had, or you forgot that you'd seen them already, which would be just as rude. So there's but it's a weird song and dance where like even they're a little weird and awkward about it. Like they're acknowledging that they know it's weird that we're saying hello again, but we still got to do it.
Yeah. No, that is interesting. I guess as well a freelance writer who doesn't see people very much. Yeah. Even when I was living in Paris, I would get out and not see people very much. The same two people, one person twice in the same, the same day or whatever. But yeah, there would be a little bit of, with the French, gêne, like a little bit of uncertainty or ill at ease feeling if you came across as not having remembered you'd seen somebody earlier, indeed. But again, I'm just like, my philosophy is, just say bonjour. It can never be really in bad taste ever, even if it's a doubling up sort of.
No, it's an excellent rule of thumb. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Julie. For anyone out there who wants to learn more about bonjour or other conversational or interacting rules and regulations and just general...
the codes of French conversation.
Exactly. Check out the Bonjour Effect. And Julie, just one last question before we leave one another. I've so enjoyed talking with you today. But before we go, I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite word in French?
What is my favorite word in French? Oh my gosh. That's a terribly hard question. I like all the French words that describe intense good feeling and good pleasure. Bonheur, jouissance. I like all of those French. I think French has for some reason, maybe it's just my idealization as an English speaker, has a great way of transmitting positive positive emotions. Je suis ravie, je suis tellement heureuse. I like all that stuff in French. To me, that's what I think of when I think about when I sit and think about French. Those are the things that come to mind as what I love about the language. And it's funny because the French themselves have all that very evocative, very powerful, emotional vocabulary, and yet they as we've seen and we've been discussing, like they keep a kind of they don't like too much smiling, and they don't like too much positive, touchy-feely kind of chit-chat sort of thing, But the language itself is so powerful in transmitting joy and the feeling of being transporté and things. So I don't really have a single favorite word. I think I have a category of words that I like, and those would be it.
That's awesome. I love that. I hadn't thought about it like that before, but you're right. They do have excellent words for describing high emotional pleasure.
Yeah, all the vocabulary around food and all the pleasure of eating and tasting and enjoying things.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, then I will say to you, excellente journée. Passe une très bonne journée. And I hope to speak with you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been Navigating the French. You can find more from me, Emily Monaco, at Emily_in_France on Twitter and Instagram. This podcast is produced by Paris Underground Radio. To listen to more episodes of this podcast, or to discover more podcasts like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com. Thanks for listening, and à bientôt!